Good morning and welcome to another edition of Coffee Talk with immigration attorney Brian D. Lerner. In this particular episode, I'd like to talk a bit about R visas, which are religious workers. There's a lot of questions going on as to what consists of an R visa, what qualifications are, what job requirements are, whether it can be paid or unpaid, and how exactly are you supposed to get it. There's a lot of people who want to come into the United States on an R, and they're just not quite sure how to do it. So I thought I would clear up some stuff with this particular video and see if I can help in regards to putting it together. So there's lots and lots of different kinds of non-immigrant visas. So one of them, of course, is the R. Now, what is the R for? Well, there's really two major categories of people who can come in on the R visa. One would be defined as a minister. Okay, now a minister itself, now I'm going to give you the definition of what immigration considers a minister, but don't think of it as only, for example, in any particular religion that they are called a minister. A minister under this particular definition would be anybody in any religion that falls under the definition that is given. Okay, so I mean, a minister could be a priest, it could be a rabbi, and so forth. There's all different kinds of persons who could be ministers, assuming they fall under the definition. So what is the definition? Well, a minister, one, is fully authorized and trained in religious denomination to conduct religious worship and perform other duties which are normally performed by the clergy of the denomination. So, first of all, one thing, you can look at the education. Generally speaking, ministers, under this definition, they're really very highly educated in their particular field. And also, you look and see that they perform weddings, they go to funerals and perform the ceremonies there. There's different ceremonies for when babies are born and so forth, depending on the religion. Again, for example, in the Jewish religion, the bris is performed. In the Catholic religion, you have baptismal ceremonies that are performed. So you have to look in regards to that initially. Now, number two, the person coming in cannot be a lay preacher or a person not authorized to perform these duties. So, while somebody may have a good following of a bunch of people and, get up and give good speeches, if they are just a lay preacher, they haven't formally gone to school, formally gotten the certificates and authorization, they're not going to qualify. Number three, they have to perform activities which are rationally related to being a minister. So, obviously if, for example, part of the duties is to reconcile the books and do the accounting, obviously that is not a normal duty that a minister would have to do. 4, works solely as a minister in the United States, which may include incidental administrative duties. And it could be part-time, which means 20 hours per week. It could be more, but it normally would have to be about 20 hours per week at a minimum. Now, the other and final element is deacons, practitioners of Christian Science, and officers of the Salvation Army may be deemed ministers. So this is like a little exception to what I had just said, but for some reason in the definition itself, they include these three areas which you can have petitioned for an R. Now, that would be the first area where somebody comes in on an R-1. Again, defined as a minister. under the laws of the Immigration and Nationality Act. Now, what about people who are not ministers? Can they come in on an R-1 visa? And the answer is yes. But they have to also meet their various qualifications. They are known as religious workers. So let's keep them separate. You have the minister on one end. That's the person who actually does the services and is sort of the head of the particular congregation. And then there's the religious workers. The religious workers will be defined in a moment, but they also can come in on R1. Now, the religious worker must be a member of the same religious denomination of the church petitioning the religious worker for at least 2 years, immediately preceding the time of the application for admission. And it must be through a bona fide nonprofit religious organization in the U.S. So if somebody sprouts up a new religion in their backyard, that's probably not going to work. Okay, it has to be a bona fide religious organization. The religious worker must be coming to the U.S. to work at least in a part-time position, which is 20 hours per week. Now, the difference here with the number of hours is the minister doesn't necessarily need to work 20 hours a week. For example, if the duties require only 10 hours a week, it's still possible to petition a minister in that capacity. But for a religious worker, they must work at least 20 hours per week. Now, 3, the religious worker must be coming to perform a religious vocation or occupation in either a professional or non-professional capacity. So then the question comes up, well, what is a religious vocation and what is a religious occupation? Well, a religious vocation is defined in immigration. It is a form of lifetime commitment through vows, investitures, ceremonies, or other types of religious indicia to show a religious way of life, such as nuns, monks, religious brothers and sisters. They are distinguished from the secular members of the denomination. So, just look at what two people do, and if one of them is sort of in a position that has, the calling to God or whatever their version of God is, that's one thing, and then you have ones that have other capacities that don't fall under religious vocation. So, the two-step process to determine if it is a religious worker, first see if it's a religious vocation. And of course, the religious vocation doesn't fall under the minister area, but then look to see if it falls under a religious occupation. So what is that? Well, the religious occupations are where the duties mainly relate to a traditional religious function and is recognized as a religious occupation within that denomination. It clearly involves carrying out the religious creed and beliefs of the denomination, and it does not include, I repeat, it does not include positions that are primarily administrative or support, such as janitors, maintenance workers, clerical employees, fundraisers, persons solely involved in solicitation of donations, or similar positions. But keep in mind that with this type of religious worker, that what I just mentioned can be incidental to the primary duties themselves. It just can't be the primary duty itself, okay? And it is not solely for religious study or training for religious work, although a religious worker is not barred from training or study. So, just to put that down, if somebody's coming to, for example, learn to be a preacher, you can't come as a religious worker for the sole purpose of training and learning to become a preacher. Okay? Again, you can come as a religious worker in some other capacity and do the training and so forth incidental to your actual position. It just can't be the primary one. So those are the definitions of religious occupation or religious vocation. Now, the next issue that comes into effect is whether or not it's a religious denomination or not. Well, so how do they define religious denomination? Because sometimes, believe it or not, it's difficult to put an R-1 petition through proving it's a religious denomination because, one, it's not real popular, you haven't really heard of it, and you have to determine if under immigration law it is a religious denomination. So you look and you see that there's a group or community of believers that is governed or administered under a common type of ecclesiastical government. Okay, I didn't do that word right, did I? Which includes one or more of the following. Okay, so you have to have a common form of worship, you have to have a common doctrine, common services, common established place of worship, and so forth. Now, again, you don't have to have all of those, but you can have one or more. Okay, so for the most part, religious denomination is not a big issue in R1 petitions because basically not the vast majority of R1 petitions are put forward with religions that are common. But if it isn't, don't despair. It's still possible to get an R1 to go through. You just have to work a little harder on that particular aspect. Now, what are the limitations on how long an R1 can stay here? Well, it's 5 years maximum. Okay, that's all you're going to get on an R1. But that's time inside the U.S. So if you come, for example, 6 months of the year on an R1 and go back to your home country for 6 months, well then 5 years will not include the 6 months that you've gone back. Or, even if you take out 2 weeks here, 2 weeks there, you can really extend that 5 years if need be. Now, you can extend your stay in R1 if you don't have the 5 years. So again, even if you originally got an R1 5 years ago, if you count the time you've actually been outside the United States, you can subtract that from the R1. Okay? Now you have to have what's called non-immigrant intent when you do an R1. That means you can't intend to come here to the United States and stay here for the rest of your life, get a green card, become a citizen, and so forth. But unlike with other petitions, if you file a labor certification or an immigrant visa petition, that by itself cannot deny your non-immigrant intent. Okay, and this is very unique because most of the time if you do file a labor cert or an immigrant visa petition, it's hard to, you cannot show you have non-immigrant intent. But with this one you can. Now the spouses and children, what derivatives come from an R1? Well, you have spouses and children, they'll get R2s. They're able to basically just show that they are the spouse and are the children. By children, they have to be under 21 and single. And that's how that works. Now, if of course you bring a child here who's 18 and you stay on R1 for 5 years, you have to keep in mind the moment the child is about to turn 21, you better do a change of status for that child or some other form of immigration papers, because the second they turn 21, their R2 will be terminated by operation of law. All right, now how do you file the R1? What do you need to do? Well, it used to be easier. It used to be, if someone was abroad, we would prepare the R1, make a nice pretty petition, send it to them. They'd make an appointment at the U.S. consulate or the U.S. embassy, go in, and hopefully it would be approved. Well, now we have to go through USCIS first, like many other types of petitions. The R cannot be approved without an approved I-129 petition at USCIS. Now the good thing is that under the law, they say if you go to the U.S. consulate, they can't send it back to the USCIS or review, what was previously approved unless they have specific evidence of a requirement for automatic revocation, misrepresentation in the petition process, or lack of qualification on part of the beneficiary. So, for all intents and purposes, if you get it approved, at the USCIS, and there's no fraud involved and you really are what you say you are type thing, then it should go fairly smoothly when you get to the U.S. consulate. Now, there has to be a supporting letter and so forth by the head of the church, or an authorized official, which will list the duties you're going to do and provide all the supporting documentation. Will state whether it's salaried or non-salaried, and keep in mind that with an R1 it doesn't have to be salaried. Now, also keep in mind, if you do a non-salaried position for an R1, it is more difficult to get approved. There's more things you're going to need to show, so it might be better to do salaried, but there's no prevailing wage requirement, meaning, if a certain person makes this amount normally in the U.S., that's what you have to pay. It doesn't work like that. So it can be a combination of, donation slash compensation. That's the way it would work. Now, the organization itself needs to show that it is a tax-exempt status, that it has tax-exempt status. That's what's called the IRS 501c filing. So if you don't have that in your church or a religious organization, you have to go get it. There's no exception to that. So you must have that filed, because without that, it's going to be really hard to prove it's a tax-exempt organization or it's a religious organization. Then, of course, you need to have evidence of the minister's qualifications, if that is what it is you are petitioning for, and that's showing the certificate of ordination or similar documents. Basically a resume showing theological program transcripts, curriculums, accreditation. There's all kinds of stuff that has to be shown, the duties that will be performed, the levels of ordination, the completion of the denomination requirements. So you get all that to show that the person qualifies as a minister. And if they're a religious worker, then there's another set of documents you'll need likewise to show that they do meet the necessary qualifications. Now, if for whatever reason the R1 is terminated, or the R1 employee says goodbye, the church has a responsibility under the law to notify USCIS within 14 days. Okay, and they have to give the reason for either termination or why the person left and so forth. So you want to keep that in mind if you decide to petition for an R1 and they leave or they are terminated. So basically, that's the gist of the R1. There'll be another video on a special immigrant religious worker petition, but keep in mind that someone can come on an R1 and then apply for the green card, self-petition basically through the religious worker petition. So it's a great way to come in if you happen to meet the qualifications. So if you have any questions, let me know. Give me a call or email.